You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Well, hello everybody. It's a great day in Kansas, and once again I am on the Screen Porch studio, and so you will hear the occasional rooster and whatever else farm noise and maybe barking dog. But I just like it out here, and I've had people tell me, say, hey, we don't mind hearing that stuff. In fact, we kind of enjoy it. So that's what you get. Michael Murphy, Voice of Reason, and Lanterns Radio Network, lanterns.buzz. We hope that you will pay attention to some of the stuff that we're doing over there. We enjoy trying to bring you some quality information, and we're trying to do it a little bit different way. So we hope you'll go over to lanterns.buzz and check out the different options that we have for you to learn some things. We have quite a number of talented writers and contributors and broadcasters, and we hope that you'll take advantage of that and go over there and check us out. We're not the name brand people. We're not the Rush Limbaughs. We're not the Glenn Becks and all, but we do have we have some things to say, and we might have some things to say that are a little bit different and maybe even more correct. We'll see. That's something always that you find out in the rearview mirror, right? You look in the rearview mirror and you know whether you were right or not. So we don't mind sticking our neck out and making a shot at that. So what are we going to talk about today? Once again, it's a typical deal where I have a difficult time kind of figuring out exactly what I want to discuss. But one thing that happened this past several days is a federal appeals court struck down the Washington D.C. good cause requirement for concealed carry permits. Why is this important? I'm going to pull that story up here because I want to take a look at it. We have a constitution. We have a constitutional republic. When I think the lady's name was Mrs. Powell, asked Benjamin Franklin when they came out of the facility where they were working on the Constitution, and so what sort of government have you given us, Mr. Franklin? And he says, a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. And I always like to use that as a launching off point and say, keep is a verb. Keep requires action. And so I can't keep something if I just lay it over on the table or lay it out, leave it laying on the street, or leave it in my unlocked car, or any number of things. That's something that could be stolen. Something that could be lost. And so we need to pay attention to the fact our republic is not something that was handed to us and then is there all the time. As Ronald Reagan said, it's just not something that's in your bloodstream that you just have. It's something you have to fight for, something you have to work for. So he understood that as well. This decision, well, I don't know, we shouldn't have to have things like this, should we? We have courts that are run amok, and I can wander around and discuss, the back and forth of this all the time. But bottom line is the Constitution was designed to be a restriction of the federal government. And what's happened is the Constitution is used by the federal government to restrict the people. It's not the way it works. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That was not its original intent. There was the case, the Heller decision that took place here a few years ago that granted people the right to carry, or to maybe not carry, but to own and possess guns. And so that was taken into consideration by the people who don't like you having guns and having a way to protect yourself. They used that as a way to say, well, okay, well, you've got to have just cause. In other words, you got to have a good reason as to why you want to have a gun. Now, who decides what's a good reason? You know, as a parent, your child doesn't do what they're supposed to do, and then we decide, you know, on an individual basis as to whether we like the reason or not. Well, government doesn't do very well with that. Number one, they have a tendency to be a respecter of persons. They'll like one person or one group and not like another, and then that varies with whoever's, you know, in power. And so you end up with something that's kind of a mishmash, and people don't know, you know, where they stand. So the idea that we have a government that can tell us when we can have a gun in some places, and, you know, in other places they don't, makes for just a mess. I don't know how else to put it. We have a situation here where Washington, D.C. is impossible to get a gun in. And after the Heller case, a lot of people thought that would open up. Well, what did they do? They passed laws that says you've got to have good cause, you've got to have a reason, and a number of places have that. Maryland has it. I believe New Jersey, New York has it. California has it. So if you go in to apply for a concealed carry permit, it depends on who's looking at it. In some cases, it's a county-by-county instance. I think California is that way. In some places, it's at the state level. I've got friends in California that have concealed carry permits, but it's not really a very broad thing because there are places where you can't conceal carry, so it's not state protected. In other words, if I have a concealed carry permit and I live off up in the mountains in northern California, I can go around there and everybody, you know, feels the way I do, and the local sheriff who decided that I was able to have a carry permit, that's all well and good. But if I go to San Francisco and get caught with a gun, I'm in trouble. And so that's the way their laws work, and it makes it very difficult for a person to be a law-abiding citizen and go around and protect themselves or be prepared to protect themselves. This decision that took place the other day, it's Wren versus the District of Columbia, is considered a big win for gun owners. I guess I don't like even the thought of saying that gun owners need a win. We got a win when we got the Constitution that says the government cannot infringe on our rights. And yet we have to continually fight for them. And once again, I understand keep is a verb. We have to keep working at it. But there was a real change in the way people look at things. And I don't know that I remember exactly when it happened. It was sort of gradual. But we were discussing the other day at a group meeting how, you know, when I was growing up and in my early adulthood, we understood the way that kind of the Supreme Court worked in most cases was that Congress would pass a law and they would look at it. The Supreme Court would look at it. If somebody challenged it, said, "Oh, that infringes on my rights," or that does this or that does that, and we don't like that. We don't like that law for one reason or the other. Court would look at it and say, well, you know, it's constitutional or it's not constitutional. And if they decided it was not constitutional, what happened? Well, it went back to the state, or to the legislature, and the legislature would change the law. They would either say, well, you know what, you're right, we shouldn't even be doing that, and they may just strike the law, or they may rewrite the law so that it fits within the bounds of the Constitution. And that's the way it used to be. Well, now, when a court makes a decision, and understand judges aren't kings. Judges don't make rulings, they write opinions. And we've discussed this before. The bottom line is when a judge makes a ruling, or a court, an appeals court where it's a group of judges it should be an opinion, and that's the way it is. You'll hear the majority opinion and the dissenting opinion, right? And yet we take it like it's law. And that's just not the way that's not every way it was intended to be. It was intended that if something is not is not correct, then it's corrected in the legislature. So we're kind of in this we're kind of in a backwards world when we're doing things the way we're doing it anyway. We can't do it right because of the way our system has evolved. Back to this decision, it was determined that this good cause requirement, as they put it, is a nefarious hurdle that few could pass. And when you set it up, and like I said, I used the example earlier about parents. You tell your child wants to do something that you don't want to do or you don't want to let them do. So what you do is you set up a situation where it's very unlikely they'll be able to do it. And I can't just come up with an example right away. They want to go to Six Flags, or they want to go do something special, or they want to buy a big fancy something, whatever. And rather than just tell them no, you tell them, well, okay, if this happens and this happens and this happens, then maybe we'll think about it. So the kid hears, okay. But the parent never was going to let you do it, okay? And that's the way this is. They would say, they passed this law, they said, well, we don't want them to have it, so we're trying to pass this law to kind of fit what the Supreme Court said in an earlier decision, and so we're going to try to do this and make this work out. Of course, they always just denied you. And so you were never able to go in. You could say, well, you know what, I'm a woman, and my ex-husband has threatened to kill me, and we've got restraining orders, and he's attacked me a number of times or whatever, and they'll look at that and say, no, but he hasn't actually killed you, or he hasn't actually maimed you and put you in the hospital, or whatever you have to say, and therefore, no, we're not going to give it to you. We don't think you should be able to protect yourself. And one of these days, I actually have a book in mind I'm going to write one of these days about carrying and owning firearms. I don't believe it's a right. We lots of times say, well, we can do something because it's our right. And I see a lot of Second Amendment type shirts, says it's my right. I don't view it as a right. I view it as a responsibility. My house has never caught fire. I've never used a fire extinguisher in my house, and yet I have fire extinguishers in my house. I have been in accidents, and I was saved from serious injury by wearing my seatbelt. I don't wear my seatbelt because it's the law. I wear my seatbelt because it's the responsible thing to do. And I see that with so many things in our daily lives. We have the government comes in and says you must have smoke detectors in your house. Well, I think it's a good idea. I have smoke detectors in my house, but I don't do it because it's a law. I do it because it's a good idea, and it's the responsible thing to do. And I think those are the sorts of things we need to sort of head back into, is looking out for our own well-being is something that's much more important than waiting for the government to tell you what you should do. As we look at this case, the good reason law is necessarily a total ban on most D.C. residents' right to carry in the face of ordinary self-defense needs. This opinion was given, and once again, it's Griffith, one of the judges who wrote a 38-page opinion. I mean, they say it right there. Bans the ability of most citizens to exercise an enumerated right that would have to flunk any judicial test. And what I think is interesting is when the Heller case, for instance, came down, did that automatically become a law everywhere in the United States that we could have guns, whatever like that? No, it didn't. And yet when the case came down in Kentucky, I believe it was, over gay marriage and the marriage license and all like that, you remember that big mess? When that decision came down, what happened? Suddenly it became law everywhere where gays could get married. How does that work? Why is it that when something goes, and that's going to get into something else, I believe the government has no business telling people who can and can't get married, and the marriage licenses are something, while it's within the state's purview to do it, I think it's another one of those things to where it's not just the federal government that steps over the bounds. I think it's the state and local governments do too. If people are going to live with whoever they want to live with, and they're going to marry whoever they want to marry, they're going to figure out a way to do it one way or the other. So, why is the state trying to control that? We're getting back into these natural rights things again. And I'm going to do some talking about that here in just a little bit. I think actually I'm probably kind of getting to the point of time where I'm supposed to be taking a little bit of a break, and I'm going to do so. But anyway, we'll pick this back up on the other side. Okay. That helps me to take a little swig and get some moisture on my vocal cords. We're back looking at this case in relation to the right for people to carry in relation to just cause. There's a case in California. There was a split in the Ninth Circuit over this case, and there was a similar case, and I don't have it right here in front of me. I didn't grab it. I forgot to grab it out. But there was a similar case in California where the Ninth Circuit, who of course is very liberal, decided they decided, well, yeah, people can decide just cause. The sheriff or whatever government entity can decide just cause. So there's a difference in opinion between two federal cases. And that was taken to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court elected not to take that case, Peruta versus San Diego case, which is a very similar issue. And the Supreme Court decided not to weigh in there. Well, now that we have another federal appeals court case who has decided something different from this one, we now have a situation set up where I think the Supreme Court's going to have to take this. In other words, if this is challenged, and of course it always is, Washington, D.C. will likely challenge this ruling and take it to the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court, at this point, I believe, has their hand forced, because you've got two appeals courts have two different decisions. So this could set something up that is really good or really bad. So stay tuned. I'm going to move on to something else. I could talk all day about the Second Amendment. I think it's interesting. And I'm going to kind of wander off here just a little bit. We were having a group discussion at a meeting, I think it was last month. We were talking about natural rights, and we were actually watching Dr. Larry Arnn's intro to the Constitution, and there are 12 videos in that. It's really very good. It's free. It's online. I encourage you to go take advantage of it and look, because Dr. Arnn sits there with a number of his students, and they discuss aspects of the Declaration and the Constitution, how and why. And he asks them, well, why do you think they did that? And it's really interesting to get these young people's take on things. And these aren't just normal kids off the street. These are kids that are going to Hillsdale College. Well, it requires you study the Constitution. This is not an elective. This is something that everybody has to do. So I think it's really good. And anyway, the idea of natural rights came up, and somebody asked me, they said, well, I don't really like the way they define natural rights there. How would you define natural rights? And I had not really given it any thought, but when they said that, it just jumped out at me. I said, well, if I was the only person in the state of Kansas and I'm out here walking around, what rights do I have? And somebody looked at me and they said, well, all of them. I said, exactly. I would have zero restrictions on me, would I? As I've mentioned lots of times in the past, Paul Harvey was famous for saying, with increased liberty comes increased responsibility. So while I would be free to wander around and strike matches and light the prairie on fire, that would be irresponsible. And so without having a law against me lighting fires, I have to reason it out within myself that that's not a good idea. I could destroy my food source, I could destroy my home, I could destroy whatever. So that's not a good idea. We also generally understand, if we're not a sociopath, we understand that our rights end where our neighbor's nose begins, so to speak. I don't have a right to go infringe on my neighbor's property. I don't have a right to go hunt on his property unless he says it's okay. There's things like that. So there's the idea that we sort of get along and we converse and all like that. And if my neighbor wants to be a jerk and put up a big fence and say, you can't come on my property, you can't look on my property, well, you know what? Okay, he's a jerk, and he does that, but it doesn't hurt me, does it? It's his property. And so it's not a big deal in the big scheme of things. It's maybe not very neighborly, but it doesn't hurt me. And it doesn't violate my rights. Now, if he builds his fence over on my property so that I can't look at it, now he has violated my rights, and we've got a different scenario going on. And those are what the courts are for. We go to court. First of all, we file maybe get a judge to give an order or whatever like that. Says, you know what, you've built your fence on somebody else's property. You're gonna have to move it. And when push comes to shove, the fence can be moved, and that's the way our system is designed to work. In most cases, we don't need to go to those ends, but that's the way it's designed. And we look at things like this Second Amendment deal, and it goes well beyond that. Of course, once again, we have all of the rights when somebody tries to infringe on those rights, and most of the time it's government, because that's who typically infringes on your rights. That's why the Constitution was written, to completely constrain the government. There is no constraint on people in the Constitution, and there's really very little constraint on the states. The only constraint on the states is the supremacy of the United States government in certain instances, such as the military, such as immigration, some defined things, and those are all enumerated in the powers that are in the Constitution. If we would follow that and understand that, we would be much better off. That's my 2 cents worth, and I'm going to move on from there. There's an article on the Blaze I saw that where the Palestinian government, and this kills me the way they do stuff. Since I write, I tend to read things in the way they're written. I don't know why I do that. Why would you read things the way they're written? Here's the headline. The Palestinian government is paying this young man for each Jew he's killed with U.S. funds. Now, when you read that, he's using U.S. funds to kill Jews. But I knew when I read the headline, I knew when I looked into the article, what it really meant was the U.S. gives funds to the Palestinian government, which they in turn are using as reward to pay this young man for each Jew he kills. Okay, excuse me. This is not a new thing, but we need to be reminded from time to time that we're dealing with people who are very selfish and irresponsible. We were just talking about the fact that our Constitution and our form of government was written over the idea of people having complete liberty, and yet being personally responsible, self-reliant. And when you're in a situation as in where the Palestinians are, that's based on the exact opposite, isn't it? And it's not compatible with peace. It's not compatible with anything else. So you've got this situation where you've got a government that's not only allowing irresponsible and violent and deadly behavior, it's actually subsidizing it. And the idea that our government gives federal dollars, which is our tax dollars, our hard-earned dollars. We go out here and we work hard every day and we pay our taxes. And the fact that 1 penny of that goes outside this country to support anything like that should drive each one of us insane, almost to the point of pitchforks and torches in the streets of Washington. And that's just one thing. If we really woke up one day, we would be so outraged. I don't know what. I can't imagine. We need to start waking up and smelling the coffee, so to speak. And speaking of coffee, I think I'm going to have another drink. Another thing I want to talk about is self-reliance. We have gravitated in this country terribly away from self-reliance. Who's in charge of your well-being? When you listen to, Bernie Sanders or any one of the liberals, and I'm going to liberals. I hate using that word, actually, progressives. And I like to say progressive because it's really what they are. They termed themselves with that back in the early 20th century. And you look at the likes of Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and all like that. But you've got to come over and understand that most Republicans are progressive as well. They just do it a little bit differently. Would we not have a full repeal if we didn't have a leadership and a Congress full of progressives? Would we not already have a full repeal of Obamacare? Would it not have been repealed within a week of Donald Trump being sworn in as president? It's unbelievable that we act, like I said, they act like they've got to take care of people. Government's job is not to take care of people. It never has been. It's specifically prohibited from taking care of people, okay? Now, state governments can do that if they choose. It's not very wise, but they can. because whatever powers are not given to the federal government are reserved for the states and the people. Now, I'm beginning to see a positive thing, a change in the way things are going, and I hope the trend continues. One of the things, if you watch TV any, and I don't watch a lot, but if you watch TV any, they've got these shows about tiny houses. And I've also seen a number of shows that talk about how some young people are making a change. And what they're doing is, we've gotten caught up for years with the idea of getting a big house, raising the family, getting eventually, as we get a little bit further along and doing well, we can have the motor home or the RV and a boat and or maybe a cabin on the lake, a condo somewhere on the beach that we enjoy. And those are the sorts of things we've always sort of viewed as the American dream kind of things. And I think the idea of the tiny house, and then the other thing I've seen is people, especially in cities. Now, you'd have a hard time doing it where I live, but if you live in a city and you're young and single, or maybe you're just a young couple, you have no children, the trend is, and I say trend, a number of people are living out of their car. And you say, well, that's insane. Well, they're not really living in a car. They'll have something like a van, and they'll belong to a gym. So they get up in the morning, they go work out, and they take a shower at the gym, they go to work. When they get done, they go get something to eat, and then they may go to the park, they may go to a movie, they may whatever like that, and then they go sleep in their car, sleep in their van. And they're doing that because of the expense of things. Everything has gotten so outrageously expensive. Well, if you think that if you suddenly understand that you're not going to have to pay all the real estate taxes, all the insurance and everything on stuff, you've got to have the car anyway, in most cases. Now, some people, of course, they can use public transportation. But in most cases, you need a vehicle to get around. And so they are just doing away with the house part. And when you look at what a house costs, you can save an awful lot of money. And if you can save an awful lot of money, you can be more personally responsible and self-reliant. So there's just some things like that I see that I think are a good thing. It's the halfway point on the show, and I've got to take a little bit of a break and pay some bills, and I will be back here in a few moments.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz. For great radio, get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Well, and we're back with you, and I appreciate, once again, you taking the time to do however it is you listen to this on the podcast, or whether you just listen over your computer while you're doing something else. Lanterns.buzz, Lanterns Radio Media Network, and we are glad that you're here, and we hope that you'll check out the content that we have online at Lanterns.buzz. I was talking about a return to old-fashioned self-reliance. The other thing I'm seeing as well, you'll see a lot of people who are, as they near retirement, they're getting out of the city, so to speak, and they're looking for places to live out in the country. I live in an area, part of the country that was homesteaded back in the late 19th century, and the government had a program. They owned all this land out here, and I I think they did it in a very wise way. They divided it out into 1 square mile sections of land, and then they divided each one of those sections, north and south, east and west, into fourths. And a quarter section, as they call it, is 160 acres. And the typical homestead, you came out here and you had a period of time, typically it was 7 years, to improve the land. You had to make certain marked improvements. You had to clear so much land, either from timber or from the grass that you could plant. You had to build a home and things like that. So after a period of time, you would own that land. And once you had fulfilled those requirements, then you owned the land. And then that land was yours, until you sold it or passed it on to your children. What we're seeing is what we've seen over the years is as people have, grown older, their families, their kids have grown up and gone away. While there used to be every square mile in this area, there used to be a family. I mean, there used to be 4 families every square mile. Now, I sit here on the square mile I live on. Mine is the only house. Across the road, which would be another section, there are 2 houses. One of them is an older house that a lady rents and lives in. And the other one is a house that the people that own that property are hunters, and they come out and they stay in it basically in the fall when they're hunting. The rest of the time it's vacant. To the east and the west, there are no houses on those sections. To the north, there is 1 house on that section. So you see, it has really evolved over time to where people have left the country and they ended up, because that's where the jobs were. You have to face the fact that if a family had 4 children and they're living on 160 acres, when they grow up, they're not going to be able to have a situation where they're doing, to carry on with their lives, with their families, generation after generation. You're going to have a situation where you've got this 160 acres, you have 4 children, they grow up, they want to get married. You can't divide it out again because now now the land gets smaller and smaller, and there's not enough to support the family, and so something has to give. And so in that scenario, typically what would happen is 3 of them would move on, and 1 would maybe stay and work on the farm and take the farm over. As other families divide up, maybe they have no children, maybe they were poor business managers and they couldn't make it farming. There's all sorts of reasons why people would leave the farm, and because it's not for everybody. It really isn't. So maybe those people have left the farm and this farm comes up for sale, and so now you buy that farm, now you've got 320 acres. And that's the way things have gone. Well, over the years, more and more people left the farms, and like I said, now there's vast areas, there's numbers and numbers of sections where nobody lives, and so now that land is all owned by somebody, and in most cases, of course, it's farmed. Most farms have become corporations. Now, that doesn't mean like a big corporation like General Mills or something like that owns it and is running it, but just as a matter of legality and whatever like that, most farms are incorporated for tax purposes. When you hear about corporate farms, it's not always like you would think. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's big corporations that do own thousands and thousands of acres, but that's not the normal. Most of the time, it's a family who has been successful and has bought more and more land and has just grown. And once again, you pretty well have to in this day and age, the way it is to be successful with farming. And I have once again wandered away from the intent of my talk. Where I was going with that is you're seeing more and more people are looking for land. They don't want 160 acres. They maybe want 40. Maybe they want 10 or 5 or whatever like that. The property I live on initially, I've been able to buy a little bit of land next to me, but initially it was about 12 acres. That's the kind of place that a lot of people are looking for. They want to get away from the city. They want to get away from the rat race. They don't want to get up in the morning and drive in traffic. They don't want to have to worry about the neighbors across the fence. They don't want to worry about the neighbors' dogs. They don't want to have to worry about the crime in a neighborhood or whatever. And so they want to leave that lifestyle. They want to come out and they want to become a little more self-reliant. They plant a garden, and they can. And when I say they can, I don't mean they can plant a garden. I mean they can their vegetables in the old-fashioned way. You get mason jars, and you take your green beans, your whatever, and you can it, and you put it away, and then through the wintertime you have vegetables to eat. And these are the sorts of things that our people made it through the Depression, and they didn't learn to do this to make it through the Depression. This was the normal way of life. So when the Depression came, they were self-reliant and they were able to handle it. the people who had moved to the cities were unable to cope. They had no mechanism, no resources with which to cope with that scenario. People out in the country, my dad told me, he says, I didn't realize we were poor. I didn't realize that we didn't have anything. He learned about the Depression basically in school, about how bad it was, because he just thought it's just the way life is. He really didn't give it any thought. And so these are the sorts of things we need to return to. Obviously, not everybody can return to the country, nor should everybody. Not everybody is suited for it. But there are many ways in which you can become more self-reliant. And I think it's those sorts of things that we need to kind of pay attention to and take advantage of. We have a tendency in our society, and it's a societal thing, and it's worldwide, really. We have a tendency to rely on other people and rely on government to take care of us. And that's why this whole health care deal comes into play. That's why a lot of this mess, creeps into our lives, is because we expect government to take care of us. And here sometimes, a few months ago, there was a debate that was put together by with Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz. And of course, Bernie Sanders believes that government supplied health care and health insurance is a right. And Ted did a good job of explaining the Constitution, and while we have a right to obtain health care and health insurance, but we don't have a right to have it given to us. And that's a very important distinction. And when we decide that I do not have to do anything for something, that destroys a lot of things. That destroys a lot of what really makes people people. When you can just sit around and have things handed to you, you suddenly feel like you're deserving of it. And that has created a very deep problem in our society, and it's going to take a long time to get over it. And in fact, I've said a number of times, I don't think we're just going to get over it in time. I don't think it's the sort of thing that over a period of time that we're going to say all of a sudden that we're going to grow up, so to speak, and start doing things in a different way. What's going to happen is there's going to be a serious collapse of some sort in our economy and in our system of government. And in that transition period, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to learn a lot of things, and the lesson's going to be very hard. And unfortunately, it will be something that will cost a lot of people their lives. It depends on what really happens, but if government services aren't there, you know as well as I do that there's many people are going to die. It's not a very big stretch for me to look at, for instance, at New Orleans after Katrina, and understand that people are going to be at each other's throats, and people are going to be unable or incapable of taking care of themselves, and they're just going to die, or they're going to die at the hands of somebody who wants to take what they have. We also saw during Katrina, we saw the heavy hand of government who came in. I vividly remember this one older woman. They said, "You have to leave." She says, "I don't want to leave." "You have to leave. We can't protect you." She says, "I've got a gun. I can protect myself." Oh, they weren't having that, and they took her down, and they took her gun away from her, and they forcibly removed her from her house. She lost everything. Now, she might have lost everything anyway, but you know what? That was her choice to lose everything if she wanted to. It was not the government's right to take her away, basically, and take it from her. It was not the government's right, nor was it the government's responsibility. And so these are sorts of things that we need to be thinking about, because, like I said, when there's going to be a time is going to come where that's not going to be an option. And we're going to be, because when you look at Katrina, that was isolated. That was New Orleans. Imagine that around the world, around the country. There's no way the government can do anything. It's not big enough, thankfully, and it's incapable. We just need to pay attention to these sorts of things, and I hope you'll... I keep harping and preaching about the idea of self-reliance and looking for the signs and looking for the things that are ahead. I know a lot of people are into the idea of seeing signs that the time is near, the end of the world or whatever. I believe that nobody knows the time. All I know is that you're just supposed to be prepared for whenever it is, and that's where we are. I'm going to take one last break, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about this gender fluidity and transgender and a few things like that. And I'm thinking maybe you'll kind of enjoy it a little bit, and I've had some fun with it. And welcome back. I told you before I took a little bit of a break there that we are going to talk about gender fluidity. I'm sorry, I don't get it. It's interesting when you're reading in Acts, when Paul went to Athens, it talks about how the people used to try to sit around and think of something new. Now you think about that. In other words, they were philosophers. And the idea was that they tried to think of things that had not been thought of before. Well, that's not entirely bad because you can sometimes come up with some new ideas. And, of course, that's how we get inventions. You sit around and think, I'm having trouble getting this job done. What would make this job easier? And you sit around and you think of something, and you invent something that nobody has ever thought of. Or maybe they thought of, but they didn't act on it. So we've got that sort of stuff going on. And anyway, I did a video yesterday and it's up on YouTube on Voice of Reason. I'd like you to go check that out if you get a chance. But gender fluidity, and I went into the deal about what it was about and what it was supposed to mean, and it really kind of drives me crazy. I'm having a little trouble finding my spot where I had that. I looked for. There's a list. I know I was not up on on what the latest is. You know, there used to be the LGBT. And they've added Q, and now at the end of that, they've added plus. And so it's LGBTQ plus, meaning there's more, and we're not going to write them down. Okay? What's interesting is I remember we went through a time, and this is part of what I did the video about, is we don't know what we're supposed to say and what we're not supposed to say. And I want to preface all this with I've got a friend that's gay, and you may have seen him. His name is Jesse. You may have seen him on Facebook or on Twitter, somewhere like that. Jesse's a baker, and Jesse's very obviously gay. He's a pretty cool guy. I like him, and he's a friend of mine. He hates this stuff. Okay? He says people just need to be people and do what they are and quit dancing around and getting in people's face. And I couldn't agree more. And yet, here we are. If you use the wrong term, and what I started to say is queer used to be a term that you can't use. That was forbidden, and you were degraded, and you were a homophobe, and all sorts of stuff. You used the word, and now it's used again. And so, like I said, you've about got to have a program. Like you go to a ball game and you don't know, okay, who's number 53 and who's 26 and all like that. You got a program to know who's playing what position and what their name is and all that stuff. You've about got to have that daily with this, because as I looked down through this list, I saw it starts alphabetical, and it went and it went and it went, and I scrolled down several pages, and I'm just down to the C's. And I went on, so I went back and I read a number. I didn't read every one. But as I looked at them and I started counting, there were 92 terms, vocabulary definitions, as they called it. And one thing interesting is they qualified it. There's an asterisk that says, this list is neither comprehensive nor inviolable, but it's a work in progress toward those goals. With identity terms, trust the person who is using the term and their definition of it above any dictionary. These definitions are the creation of cultural commons, emails, online discussions, personal chats, and the initial curation of being mine and growing in collaboration. Anyway, so it talks about who she had worked with in this book that she wrote or whatever. In other words, when you're talking to somebody, if they say something that you don't really mean and understand, or use a word in a way that you're not used to, you just have to trust them that they know what they're talking about. And how are you supposed to know? It's mind blowing as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, you get into this deal and you start reading these, and I just don't understand how people can be so. I don't think confused is the right word. I think what we have is we have a society that's searching. We, as individuals, we want to have meaning in our life, and we like to have something that we understand is kind of beyond us, and that we're part of something that's bigger. Now, historically, that's a role the church filled. That's a role that your relationship with God filled. Well, now as we've taken God out of our society, we've gone to the point to where now we've got to have another way to do that. We've got to have another way to fit in. And people are looking for stuff. And this isn't new. This has been going on for a long time. It's just that what we've done now is we've declared it normal. I know there would be people to say, well, who are you to decide what's normal? Well, all I can do is go by the standard. We were given the scriptures, and the scriptures were the impetus and the basis for the founding of our nation. And our nation didn't become the nation it became by everybody doing what they want and what made them feel good. It did it based on, once again, liberty and personal responsibility. And so those are some of the things that we need to get back to. I look at this, once again, I looked at this list, and I did the video yesterday. I kind of had some fun with it. I said, gender fluid, and I read this definition of gender fluid. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. You just can kind of become, you can be male, you can be female, you can decide you're neither, and that can change. And you can just go back and forth. In other words, whatever I want is okay. Well, now, as parents, if you're a parent, if you've ever been a parent, and if you've ever been a child, I hope you've been a child, you understand that children can't just raise themselves. They have to have guidance. And what I see in a lot of this stuff is I see namby-pamby parents whose child says, I feel like and whose little boy says, I feel like I'm a girl. Well, why do you feel like you're a girl? I just feel like I'm a girl. Okay, well, that's nice. Would you like to wear a dress? Rather than maybe we've got a confused child here that needs some counseling. Part of this is in the news too because of the deal about the transgender thing, and Donald Trump, of course, just announced that he's ending this experiment or whatever. And when you wonder, and I have to look things up because once again, these terms change. What used to be a meaning of a term changes. In 10 years, suddenly it's something completely different, and then you feel like an idiot because, well, that's not what it means. I looked up an article on WebMD. Now, that WebMD, of course, is the source of all things righteous, right? And, I'm sitting here looking at this, and I don't have very much time left, but the doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl, but they do that by what it looks like on the outside, but not what it feels like. And this is what we're getting into, this problem of feelings. Everything is based on feelings, and nothing's based on fact and reality. And so there's where we kind of wander off. So this gender fluidity mess, we just end up with a situation where people decide, I want to do this, I want to do that. I knew a young lady a number of years ago. She would dress crazy. She would do this or do that. I said, what's up with this? And she says, I just want to be, I want to stick out. I don't want to be like anybody else. I want to be my own person. She says, but every time I start doing something, everybody else starts doing the same thing. So then I have to change. I said, why don't you just be a nice, responsible young lady? And if people, and as I look around, not very many people are going to follow you with that. She kind of looked at me and kind of gave me that look. Anyway, I'm essentially out of time. I really appreciate the fact that you guys have joined me in this endeavor. And I sometimes ramble, and maybe I'm a little bit hard to follow, but I appreciate the fact that you're there for me, and that we can get along. I get to talk and you get to listen, and that's just sort of the way it works. God bless you, and we will see you soon.